Good evening and welcome to episode 70 of the Political Mic podcast. I'm so excited. This evening, we've got a lot we're going to cover, folks. New York special election, seen as the last but best test of the electorate's midterm leanings, confirmed what Democrats hoped and Republicans feared. Predictions of a red wave may be overblown. After months of deliberation, Biden okays sweeping student loan relief as midterms approach, energizing progressives while sparking heated criticism from conservatives on the right. A redacted version of the affidavit used to obtain a search warrant for former President Donald Trump's Florida home will be unsealed tomorrow, Friday. A federal magistrate judge has ordered this, and some Republican lawmakers and other critics have raised the prospect of armed IRS agents threatening ordinary taxpayers. It's a nights like these when I'm looking forward to having a really strong panel, and we're not going to disappoint tonight. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of the gentlemen tonight. We've got Mr. Jordan Stredwick, 2021 graduate of Howard University School of Law, living in Washington, D.C. Jordan's interested in wellness, history, the emerging commercial space industry, and developing opportunities for Africans and the African diaspora to participate in the exponential growth of the technology sector. He's currently working and employed with the fintech startup Zimbali Networks. So, Mr. Stredwick, thanks for being back on.
Thanks for inviting me.
So we also have Arsene Charles, who's a Florida native and an education equity advocate. He formerly served as the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Aerospace Defense and Policy Fellow. Arsene was placed within the executive office of the Vice President of the United States. His primary responsibilities included focusing on a diverse portfolio of federal domestic policies, including defense cyber security strategy, education, labor, commerce, technology, and small businesses. Previously, he worked with the Maryland Academic Validation Program as a policy analyst. He is a full-time PhD student in Howard University Higher Education Leadership Program and Policy Studies Program. His research focuses on diversity and STEM education, particularly at historically Black colleges and universities. He's a graduate of the American University of Public Affairs and holds a master's of public administration with a concentration in public financial management. He also has a bachelor's degree in English, creative writing, with a minor in education from Florida State University. Arsene, privilege and honor to have you back on, sir. We also have Nate Honore. So for the third week in a row, Nate Honore is back on, and I had to have him this week because we were talking about New York congressional politics, I think yesterday or earlier this week, and I said, we have to have his expertise, his knowledge represented on the panel yet again. Nate Honore, of course, is a recent graduate of Quinnipiac University School of Law, graduated this past May 2022. Glad to have you back on, Nate. And hopefully we'll be joined by Mr. Edwin Nwangpa soon. Now, I want to turn our attention to the congressional. This is the last big primary election of 2022, the season that just took place this past Tuesday. And there were a lot of takeaways. Donald Trump seemed to have a winning night, but so did Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis demonstrated that Trump isn't the only Republican in Florida with a political machine. Primaries in 4 states, including New Hampshire, are yet to come. But Tuesday marked the last of the year's major multi-state contests, leaving the shape of the general election landscape all but complete. It would have been easy to write Nebraska off as a fluke, but Democrats ran better than expected in a House race last month. And then came Minnesota, where Democrats again beat expectations, and then New York. On Tuesday, the dam broke. We had the congressional election that took place in the special election that took place in New York's 19th congressional district. And it would have been a victory for Democrats if they'd even come close. Instead, Democrat Pat Ryan beat Republican Mark Molinaro in a district that Joe Biden narrowly won in 2020, but that would have appeared to favor Republicans in a normal midterm climate. This is what's interesting about this particular congressional district. It has really served as a canary in the coal mine, a bellwether for how elections result. We had a situation where, in 2012, it went blue. And of course, 2012, Obama won the White House. In 2014, the Republicans won the district. And of course, 2014 was a good year for Republicans. 2016, Donald Trump wins the district. And of course, Donald Trump went on to win the presidency. 2018, the Democrats won the district again. Democrats win the House in a huge blue wave. 2020, Joe Biden wins narrowly. And so naturally, people were thinking Republicans are going to pick up this seat. And lo and behold, the Democrats take it. Now, say, make of that what you will. But it seems as if this congressional district has a particular trend going on. And so overall, the last major primary night of the year, the winds appear to be shifting in Democrats' favor. It could be tempting to read too much into this, but I want to ask you all, do you think that based on not just the congressional district and District 19 of New York, but all across the board this past Tuesday, do you think that the results have shown that the wind seems to be in the Democrats' sails at this moment?
Definitely. Democrats have picked up some serious momentum in the wake of the Dobbs ruling, which overturned Roe and Casey, the Supreme Court cases that made abortion legal nationwide. To the point, actually, Mike, where the winning candidate, the Democrat, the future Representative Ryan, actually centered his entire campaign on the fact that he would protect the right to choose. It's also nationwide as a whole. In fact, at least 2 Senate candidates this past week, including Blake Masters in Arizona, have had to release statements clarifying their views. They're actually quite extreme views on abortion. So, Democrats have this big joker, if you will, in abortion rights. So as long as they run on that, they at least give themselves a fighting chance.
That's a good point. And we are dealing with a different landscape after the Roe versus Wade decision, and it seems to be abundantly clear. There was hope that decision, or the leak of the decision, remember Ben May, we were talking about the leak of the decision. We were hoping, the conservatives were hoping that would just blow over time. People would get so caught up in inflation, gas prices. Well, the gas prices are coming down. The Democrats seem to be delivering in Congress, right? We were talking about how difficult it would be for a gun legislation to get passed and signed into law. That happened, right? You can make of it. You can argue that this was nowhere near what progressives wanted. Of course, it's not. It's the truth. But guess what? We got a bill. Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act, all these different pieces of legislation, making the Democrats look like they're just really on the job, addressing the economic crisis, while the Republicans are still, using the same old tagline that they've been using earlier this year, which is that the Democrats are inept and inadequate in dealing with the economy. Well, the landscape is changing fast, and people seem to be more concerned with, especially with Roe versus Wade, when we're starting to see these states overturn or pass legislation, rather, that bans abortion so abruptly, right? So quickly. States have not wasted time, southern states in particular. Anyone else?
I'll hop in here and I'll just start by saying the rubber has hit the road, and the question now becomes who is going to be the driver in the front seat. As I think about from the state where I'm from, Florida, in the Senate right now in the race, we have Val Demings facing off against Marco Rubio. And as we think about just sort of the legislative accomplishments of Marco Rubio, there's a lot of sort of things that voters in Florida are concerned about, specifically as we think about what happened with Parkland, and also a series of other things. How could that happen under the watch of legislators who essentially allowed that just that process to be a norm in the state of Florida? There are a couple of polls that said that Val Demings is ahead of Marco Rubio, but ultimately it is going to take voters to turn out and ensure that Val Demings can get that A-OK to go ahead and solidify that win. As we think about Georgia, we have Herschel Walker being against Raphael Warnock. Some people are viewing that as a race that's not to be taken as legitimate, but in 2016, we did see the sort of issue with that approach when we think about politics, viewing someone who is running in politics as not legitimate. And next thing you know, there's an upset or a surprise. And as voters who are, for voters who are more so on the progressive or liberal end of things, they're upset for the rest of that duration of that elected officials sort of term. You have some representatives in South Carolina who are also running, but as we understand, the former chair, or the present chair of the Democratic Party ran in South Carolina, was unfortunate in this past cycle. So there are some interesting conversations that's happening right there in South Carolina. And then as we think about what's happening in Maryland, we have some really interesting things that's happening in Maryland, not necessarily at the congressional level, specifically at the state level. I know Anthony G. Brown, he is now running to be the Attorney General. He was representing in Maryland, the former Lieutenant Governor. You have Westmore, who worked in poverty programs, had a business working there. Now he has the nomination. So when we think about Democrats, specifically in the South, you're beginning to see this sort of tide that's turning. And by and large, a lot of people do attribute some of that or a lot of that. I would attribute a lot of that, but some people say some of that, right, to Stacey Abrams and the sort of political machine, to be quite frank, that Stacey Abrams has built there, but also this sort of centralized political power that Black voters have essentially gained, right? When we think about the election of Vice President Harris and a lot of Black and brown personnel now being in high positions across the Biden administration, this is a mark of a new era. And I think if I had anything to say about this, the tide is turning in the favor. Oh, I forgot about North Carolina. Sherry Beasley, who was also the judge, the Supreme Court judge in North Carolina. But some are skeptical because there was no primary there. So again, you have folks who are contrarian about this, I guess for the purposes of being contrarian, but there is evidence that this is tipping in the favor of Democrats, specifically when you think about Democrats who are supporting issues around racial justice and civil rights. But it's just really going to take being able to build out those campaigns and putting out those messaging personnels and really those surrogates to explain, as you mentioned earlier at the onset of this conversation, Michael, about some of those legislative gains and those legislative accomplishments and helping people understand how this is relevant to their day-to-day lives.
That's awesome. And you made me think, Arsene, about this past Tuesday. Marco Rubio was making a direct appeal on Fox News saying, we're being outspent. This is interesting. You're talking about a sitting United States senator being outspent by the challenging candidate. That in itself is a headline. He said, I need people to help me because she's raising all this money from ultra liberals. He said that in a Fox News appearance. He said, please give because we're being outraised. Now, Demings is a former Orlando police chief, of course. She accelerated her campaign fundraising over the summer, hauling in an impressive total of more than $46 million so far. Rubio's campaign hasn't quite matched her pace, prompting his appeals for more funds. So Florida is tilted towards Republicans in recent elections, and Rubio remains the favorite. But a recent poll conducted by the University of North Florida found Rubio trailing Demings by 4 points. Some Democrats hopes have been raised at the possibility that the trend could change, especially following the public backlash to the Supreme Court decision gutting Roe versus Wade. Just to pull back a little bit and just look at the balcony perspective here. Even the Pew Research Center showed that the majority of people being polled said that they prefer the Democratic candidate slightly more. I know it's just a slight percentage advantage, 44% to 42% Republicans. But when we're talking about how Democrats should have been underwater, right? Republicans really should have been able, especially now you're talking about the gas prices, Afghanistan, they were hoping to help, put a lot of wind in their sails. They wanted the Democrats to look like they were incompetent. They couldn't run a government. They're out of control, spending liberals. Even now with the Inflation Reduction Act, I've seen some ads. How can Raphael Warnock say he cares for Georgia families if he's spending on this, multi-billion dollar plan for, greenhouse emission to reduce carbon emissions and do all these things when we need bread and butter issues being addressed? And, it just seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I just feel as if the Republicans' messaging is falling flat. I'm taking this into perspective, looking back at 2010, the first midterm of the Obama presidency, where the Democrats had a huge victory with the Affordable Care Act. And the Republicans now spend the remainder of the primary season characterizing the Democrats as, tax and spend liberals who have gone on this venture and enacted this socialist policy. There were talks of death panels. There were talks of how, you're no longer able to go to your private doctor. All kinds of narrations came from that piece of legislation, and it seemed to work for the Republicans. I'm not sure if that strategy is working this time for the Democrats. Anyone?
Well, the Senate especially, Mike, it's candidate quality that matters over everything. The House, you can, the House is by design for the crazies, for lack of a better word. It's, more directly attached to the people. The Senate is where candidate quality really matters, because when you're running in a House district, you only have to appeal to your neighborhood. When you're running for the Senate, you have to appeal to your whole state. So states like Arizona and Georgia that are not as red as they were 10, 12 years ago are significantly more swingy now. You can't nominate a guy like Blake Masters, a Trump mega donor, against a middle of the road Democrat and hope that the extremist, by his own admission, is going to have an easy time. That's really what Mitch McConnell was referring to last week when he said Democrats will probably keep the Senate. Now, as far as Florida goes, I'm not sure exactly how far ahead Val Demings is. I do agree that this race is probably closer than it looks, but Florida has been trending redder and redder for a little while now. But candidate quality is important, and if her presence on the ballot can help down ballot candidates in the House and for statewide elections, that's a really good thing. As Arsene pointed out earlier, there's a kind of leveraging of Black voting power that we haven't seen before in the South that really began in the last campaign cycle, but it's especially flourishing now. The only thing that worries me is the voting restrictions that have been passed in states like Georgia and South Carolina. But, if there's anyone who can find a way around that, it's going to be the people who have been on the ground and building and laying this groundwork.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, thanks.
Well, let me introduce you first, Mr.
Yeah,
Wampa.
okay,
I'm glad to have you with us. Mr. Edwin Wampa is currently a vice president at one of the largest financial services institutions in the world. He's part of the Supplier Diversity and Responsible Sourcing team, where he serves as Supplier Diversity Manager, specifically for the local markets and partnerships. In his position, he serves as an advocate for small and diverse businesses, a liaison to key partner organizations, a project manager for strategic initiatives, and a manager and an analyst of related supplier diversity spend data. Thank you so much for being part of the show tonight, Mr. Nwangpa. Go ahead.
Excuse the technical difficulties over here. We one power outage and everything got reset. So sorry about that. So I think one of the things you're seeing in Florida is maybe a little backlash to the DeSantis hard right everything. I think there's a lot of negatives that have been on the ground in Florida, whether it comes down to Disney World or it comes down to the school system, or it comes down to how they were treating people during COVID and stuff like that. I think the voters are now stepping out and saying maybe we need to not go as hard to the right as we're seeing. So I think that's what you're seeing in Florida with Val Demings. Val Demings has always been a threat for everyone in Florida because she's a law enforcement Democrat, so they can't say she's soft on crime because of her police background. So you're going to see a little bit, but I'm not convinced that Marco Rubio loses, especially with his handle on Southern Florida. But we'll see.
I would say that's a great point. When we think about the sort of hurdles that's out there, that is, in my perspective, what it ultimately comes down to. A couple of years ago, the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition passed Amendment 4, which said that nonviolent offenders can get their right to vote restored. And so that went all the way up into the highest court in Florida. And essentially what happened is they will have to pay their fees back before they get the right to vote, get the right to vote restored. The proportion of individuals who would be eligible to get their right to vote were overwhelmingly Black and brown. So that's just one impediment or hurdle that has found a way to really just materialize in as we would call it, the DeSantis era. But there are a series of things that have been there for some time, and they continue to be challenges. When we think about Georgia, I'll give you an example. I was in Buckhead when the 2020 election was happening, and this was in a predominantly white area. The voting time literally took probably less than 5 minutes relative to the majority black area in Atlanta. It took, about 20 to 30 minutes, probably a little bit more than that. And so when we think about the voting time itself, but also the obstacles that have been erected and that are continuing to be erected, this question of, is the GOP messaging falling flat? It might be true. But when it comes down to people who are actively getting access to the ballot, people who are actively getting access to the opportunity to vote, specifically in the South, there are barriers that continue to be erected on top of the barriers that are already there. And so I go back to my original point, which is it's going to take that messaging. It's going to take people who are in Democratic administrations, people who believe in liberal and progressive policies, getting out there in this time that is left, right? And communicating to the public, communicating to the voters, specifically their legislative accomplishments and what is standing in their way. For example, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, that passed in the House, did not pass in the Senate. We know why. For example, issues around voting, that passed in the House. They took a vote for it in the Senate. It did not pass. These are the type of things that people who are a part of the public, specifically the people who are registered, they need to know. And I don't think they understand the specifics and the technicality behind it all, partly because the media, to be honest with you, uses this kind of jargon and it just gets really confusing. But also, again, you need those people, those surrogates, those people who can speak the average, everyday, common person's language and help them understand, no, this is what's happening. And so this is why, because it's happening, this is why you need to still, regardless, go ahead and vote. And just know that you have organizations like the Urban League, like the NAACP, like Color of Change, who are thinking about tearing down some of these structural issues and challenging those things.
No, that's a good point, because DeSantis, who, has been looking like he's doing, DeSantis really is, to me, I think DeSantis is this era's version of W. Bush around 99, 2000. That darling conservative that they're all prepping and hoping runs for president and takes the mantle. DeSantis has been proud to talk about how the state arrested 20 Floridians on charges of voter fraud. And he touted the arrest before some uniformed law enforcement agents. The optics are everything, of course. And so a spokesperson for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement said the alleged crimes took place during the 2020 election and that each person was charged with 1 count of false affirmation and 1 count of voting as an unqualified elector. DeSantis said those arrests were disqualified from voting because of convictions for either murder or sexual assault, making them ineligible to have their voting rights automatically restored under Amendment 4, which Arsene pointed out, which Florida voters approved in 2018 to make it easier for felons to cast a ballot. He says the law is the law, but these people didn't register to vote by themselves. DeSantis has made no bones about, he's made it clear. He wants to ensure that it's more difficult or impossible, rather, for those who are formally convicted to be able to cast a ballot. And then now you have his opponent, Charlie Crist, who said, and it really stood out to me. He said, if you have to choose between the hate mongering, that's what he said, of his opponent and the love that he wants his campaign to represent, right? You're not really a moderate. You're not a moderate if you're still trying to decide between the two of them. So, after all that you've seen in terms of DeSantis trying to be as much as a mini Trump as possible, what else is there for you to see, for you to make up your mind as to whether you're standing with Trump or you're standing with principle or standing with policy? I thought that was a good point. Usually we think that moderate voters have to be soothed and coddled, and we have to come across as nice to them and making sure that they're comfortable and at ease before they make up their minds. But he's saying, look, you have a choice, right? You've seen what DeSantis has to offer. You've seen everything that Trump has to offer. So basically, choose ye this day is his appeal to these moderate voters. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think one of the goals and the hopes of the Republican Party has always been that they can run a younger candidate against an older Joe Biden and have a juxtaposition, no matter what Biden does, that they're running somebody who's 30 years younger than him. with the fears that Kamala Harris will be the president if something happens to Joe Biden, right? I think that's what they've wanted to put together. And DeSantis fits the profile. He comes from a large state in the South. He's one of those two states when you think about it, Texas and Florida, where they're calling people to move out of the blue states down to those two states specifically. They're at war with California. And then you've seen our friend out on the West Coast, or I'd say my friend out on the West Coast, Gavin Newsom, governor, pushing back, beating up DeSantis every time he can. Today he dropped $100 million, I think, or $100,000, I'm sorry, into the campaign of Charlie Crist, saying, supporting him and trying to make that sort of connection. So I think DeSantis is, as much of a dream he is, he's no Trump. He can try to be Trump, but Trump has this ability, I should say, to make the lowest, I don't want to say low as in a low life sort of person, but a low as in far as their income. Low income people are flocking to him like he's one of them. DeSantis hasn't got there yet.
Yeah, and another thing that was noteworthy, I think, of Tuesday night was the fact that Matt Gaetz did well, right? Matt Gaetz, a Trump favorite, beat his closest opponent by more than 40 percentage points. He has become a Make America Great Again, or MAGA, darling, really. With the primaries all but finished now, Trump's midterm record is not without blemishes, though. There was his humiliation in Georgia in May. His preferred candidates lost gubernatorial races in Idaho and Nebraska and New Hampshire. Trump world failed to find any prominent Republican to run against the incumbent governor, Chris Sununu. Sununu called Trump I don't want to say the expletive, but crazy is what I'll say, as the roast style, at the roast style Griderian club dinner this year. For the most part, from J.D. Vance's victory in the Ohio Senate primary to Representative Liz Cheney's defeat last week, the midterms belong to the former president. However, it seemed on the Republican side, he had a pretty good, score. It's really a mixed bag, of wins and losses. But you can't deny the fact that Trump has a solid grip on this party. And the day the midterms are over, it's off to the races for 2024. And he's already seemed to have sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Pence could spend all the time he wants in New Hampshire and say all the platitudes and things that we already know to be true in terms of the FBI is not, an enemy of the state or whatever it is but none of that would mean anything if Trump's grip of the party is still so strong. Jordan, you wanted to add it?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so Trump's endorsement record this primary season, according to the research that I've done, is about 90% higher, actually. So obviously that's concerning if you don't like Trump. It could be a good thing for Democrats, possibly, if those polarizing individuals push people to the left. I think a lot of those races probably were races that the Republicans kind of had in the bag up until this point, but now because of Dobbs, because of this energy shift, and because people are starting to lean, it seems like a little bit more away from Trumpism, that having this big block of candidates that all represent Trump could lead to some unexpected losses for them. My greater concern is with Trumpism itself. And so the fact that, his 2018 endorsement record was 58%. 2020 was 77%. Now we're at 92%. And actually, I think that 92 is a little bit low because he won some more races after that number came out. So that's where my concern lies, is the continuously rising and coagulating energy of these folks. If you think about how much damage he was able to do just in terms of the campaign, his last cycle, and then you imagine a world where you have a way stronger base for him, not just in terms of the intransigence of his supporters, but also in terms of actual legislators who are saying things in speeches like, I won't let you down. They're fully aware that the only reason for many of them they have this shot at office is because Trump selected them. And so that loyalty that they're going to have for him and his ideals, regardless of what he says and what he says Monday versus Tuesday, is extraordinarily concerning for me.
Yeah, it's crazy because you have, in addition to that, Democrats banking on the candidates being so Trumpy that the voters can't, fathom or, comprehend ever voting for them. And that's a huge risk, right? Especially after we've seen that people are willing to vote. Look at Matt Gaetz, right? Matt Gaetz, who was just under investigation for having, sex with a 17-year-old girl and paying for her for it. That has no impact whatsoever, it seems, on the fact that he was, reelected. I mean, 40% percentage points is a huge gap. I mean, you can't deny that. That's a big deal. And so it seems as if none of those investigations had any kind of toll on Matt Gaetz. And I just use that as evidence, really, of the fact that, you could have someone who, has an issue when it comes down to investigations or criminal probes or anything like that, but they still come across as the better of the two candidates to a lot of these voters, especially if these voters are perceiving Democrats to spend recklessly. You're talking about, we're going to get to it, student loan debt forgiveness, right? There's already a lot of noise surrounding that decision by the Biden White House. You have the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Almost, I believe, was it $369 billion going towards, clean energy and ventures that are aimed at reducing carbon emissions by at least 40% by the year 2030. You're talking about the CHIPS Act and other things that require government spending. For those who may resonate with the message that Democrats are spending at a time where they're pinching pennies, I'm wondering if that, Democratic strategy would fall flat on its face. My fear is that it is, because, and I said this before in the show, it's always hard to get the Democrats on one page, it seems. And now they're finally on a page and it's to do something so risky like this. Mr. Ronco?
I think like George Bush said, this is a little bit of strategery by the Democratic Party. Democrats have been labeled as being unstrategic, unintelligible when it comes down to putting together something solid. But when they do, everyone's like, well, is it luck? And we start questioning what they're doing. If you really look at, there's no coincidence that two things passed at the same time, meaning that Joe Manchin just happened to decide on that day that he was going to fall in line and do all that. That was strategy wise by the Democrats. And then even Joe Biden could have done student loans a year ago, right? I would have waited till now to do it also. No one's paying. They're already on hold. So why not wait until it's in the right line of politics to do it? A couple months before the election. I would do that too. So I think these are all, the Democrats flooded the market with wins in election season. And the Republicans nominated people who, if they were honest with themselves, they wouldn't vote for. Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock, if you compare the two, there's no one who can logically come up with Herschel Walker being a better candidate for anything other than a push-up contest with Raphael Warnock, right? So and this is and it's not just because I'm a fan of Rev. It's just a common thing, and they're going to struggle. The Republicans are going to struggle to try to make that differentiation when they have a candidate that won't debate, a candidate that didn't even debate in the primaries, and a candidate that won't go up against the Democratic Party because every time he speaks, he trips over himself. So I don't see. I think the Democrats were strategic. I think the risks they took were good risks. You have to, high risk, high reward. I think Pennsylvania, they're doing very well in Pennsylvania. They were thinking that could be a loss. The fact that Val Demings is up in August, almost September. I mean, if you said that would happen 2 years ago, everybody on this panel and in this world would say no way, right? So I think the strategy is working.
Yeah, no, you got a point there, and you know, I was thinking about the fact that a lot of folks have been, and we'll get to the student loan debt, very critical on the White House because they were saying they should have adopted the Elizabeth Warren model of forgiving at least $50,000, right? That was the model she ran on in 2020. What's the point of having all these pauses? But this is the thing. We have, with this White House, pauses that we would never have seen if Trump was reelected, right? Or if any other Republican became president in 2016, was elected. So all the folks who are, saying that their votes surround around one issue, and that's student loan debt, I mean, you need to pay attention. I just want to throw that in there. But Nate, you and I were talking about earlier New York congressional politics. And before we leave the midterm topic, I do want to, this is one of the main reasons I had to have you on tonight. Talk about why you said that Mondaire Jones actually reduced progressive's chances in that particular district. I think it was New York 10 congressional district.
Well, one of the things that we didn't get to bring up earlier is the wild New York primary that we saw on Tuesday night. So it's been a bit of a drama for a while now. The New York State, State House is supermajority Democratic. So they drew a very Democratic gerrymandered map, if you will. New York lost a seat in the last round of redistricting. The map that the legislature drew favored Democrats incredibly heavy. It would have given, I think, 23 to 3 seats in terms of districts that Biden carried in 2020. Obviously, of course, state Republicans sued and tried to argue that it was an illegal gerrymander. They won, of course, at the highest level. And so the court appointed a Republican activist to redraw redraw the maps. There were 2 big consequences. Number one is that 2 House chairs got forced to run in the same primary, Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney. And that's a very rare thing where House chairs are running against each other. Usually they get to keep their seats. And in the second instance, 2 upstate Democrats were drawn into the same district, Sean Patrick Maloney, who's the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and Mondaire Jones, a progressive who won his seat in the last cycle. Now, Jones decided to run in New York 10th, a district that would have been very progressive, that almost was tailor-made for him. However, he had to run. The front runner in that district was Dan Goldman, who, if you remember, was the lead counsel for the first impeachment, the Ukraine impeachment. Now, Goldman is incredibly wealthy. He's an heir to the Levi Strauss fortune, as in the jeans company. So he was able to pour a lot of his own money into this race. Jones running in this district as well meant that the progressive vote in this district was splintered. So it was Goldman in first with, I think, 24% of the vote. And the first runner-up, progressive local activist with 22%. Jones had 17%. So you see where that kind of vote splitting, because Jones did not run his original district and ran a different one. Now progressives lose that upstate seat to a more moderate candidate, one who's more affiliated with Bill and Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi. And they lose their chance to run in a seat that's almost tailor-made for them, a seat that's, super blue in the heart of Manhattan. So it, cost progressives not running strategically in that area cost them 2 votes, or rather 2 seats in the House.
Does anyone agree with this assessment?
Yeah, I mean, as a person who lives in the New York area most of the time, the politics of the congressional map was a big issue, right? And nobody was willing to take a back seat, and everyone said, let's just see how the primary plays out in order to figure that out. And while most people like myself are sitting on the sideline before we write checks, right? Because we're like, okay, I don't know, we like them all. These are people who we're just friends before the map was drawn out, and we're in the same room asking from checks from the same people. Now, they had to figure out in the primary. I'm less concerned with New York, to be honest with you, because New York politics is a thing.
A bloodbath.
It's a thing. Yeah, it's a thing. I'm just glad it wasn't like an AOC going up against somebody, and then we have to make more national news outside of you guys who are politically astute on this show, and then the people who actually live in those districts. Nobody in Nebraska knows and cares about New York 10 or anything like that. So I'm hoping that we'll get to the election and then see what happens. Mute.
Mike, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So this past Wednesday, President Biden made some big news. He announced that his administration was canceling up to $10,000 of student loan debt for millions of people and up to $20,000 of debt for low and middle income borrowers who previously received a Pell Grant. The loan relief will be limited to borrowers who earn less than $125,000 a year, or families earning less than $250,000 a year. In addition, the White House plans to extend the moratorium on monthly payments and interest for one last time through December 31st. In a speech at the White House on Wednesday, Biden talked about the rising cost of attending college in the United States and the overwhelming burden this places on low and middle income Americans. He said that an entire generation is now saddled with unsustainable debt in exchange for an attempt, at least, at a college degree. He said the burden is so heavy, even if you graduate, you may not have access to the middle-class life that the college degree once provided. Many people can't qualify for a mortgage to buy a home because of the debt they continue to carry. And so the president said 43 million people would benefit from his student loan debt plan, with 20 million Americans having their student loans fully wiped out completely. He said people can start to finally crawl out from under that mountain of debt to get on top of their rent and their utilities, to finally think about buying a home or starting a family or starting a business. Now, there has been some backlash to this decision, of course. You had Fox News host Sean Hannity yesterday, blasting President Biden's plan to forgive some student debt after acknowledging that it would likely benefit some of his own staff. Conservative and Fox News hosts were up in arms over this decision. Hannity reportedly paid upwards of $30 million a year. And he noted that there were Fox News employees who could be eligible to have some of their debt canceled. He said the people that likely will benefit the most are middle class. Think about that. Think about it. You get out of college, you're not making a lot of money. We have a lot of young people that work on my TV show. They're not making $125,000. They're now eligible to get, in some cases, up to $20,000, and in other cases, $10,000 erased. He said this is new Green Deal radical socialism. You also had Jeanine Pirro calling President Joe Biden's announcement disgusting, while acknowledging that she never had to borrow money for her education because her family paid for it. She said, "My heart bleeds for the people who actually went out and paid for their loans, who went out without things, whose family said, 'I'm sorry, we can't afford your loans.'" She said, "Look, my family paid for my education. I'm sure they had better things to do with their money. I didn't have to take out loans because they paid for them, but they worked hard for their money. This is a giveaway, and it's disgusting." You also have some conservatives arguing that this would actually increase the inflation problem that the country is facing. I want to get your response to the criticism from the right of the administration's decision, and your response to the criticism that this would actually worsen rather than improve the inflation crisis that we're currently experiencing.
Well, Mike, the conservative, meltdown in response basically says this was the right thing for Democrats to do, because no matter what Joe Biden did on student loans, they weren't going to like it. But the fact that they're this mad shows that they know this is a winning issue. Now, as far as the actual forgiveness itself, I've said multiple times 10,000 is a silly number, and capping it at $125,000 is even sillier. But, first off, the doubling it for Pell Grant recipients is a legitimate stroke of genius, because most Pell Grant recipients are either first-generation college students or come from lower-income households in the first place. So that is something that is targeted at people who look like you and me without actually saying it's for people who look like you and me. So that was a very good thing. And I do think that Democrats as a whole have been somewhat disciplined on actually forgiving $10,000 of student loan debt. Bernie Sanders ran on canceling all of it. Elizabeth Warren ran on canceling 50,000. Chuck Schumer supported canceling 50,000. But they've all said this is a huge thing that will help a lot of people, and and also kind of refocuses our discussions about this, that we can do more to help average people. As far as inflation, I'm really not so sure. I'm not an economist or a banker or a financier or anything, so I can't really give you the hard numbers. But this is $10,000 that a lot of people are getting an anchor, cut off from around them. So as it allows people to have a little bit more to spend, to invest, and to actually, make more decisions with their own money that they were not able to make before.
Yeah, this administration to me has demonstrated a lot of wisdom. I think in this particular instance, it struck the perfect balance to me between the Bernie and Elizabeth Warren wing of the party calling for complete elimination of debt, and those who argue that this would either hurt the economy or wouldn't be fair for those who had to pay their way. I mean, we're talking about, yes, for some, their debt is completely wiped away, but there are many who are, just like you and me, Nate and Jordan, who are law students, and this is just a drop in the bucket, right? And so we understand that, at least for me, I think this was the perfect chord to let to let the public know this is an issue that they're taking seriously, they're prioritizing, but they're also approaching it with more caution, or more. Let me rephrase that. Not caution, but they're more conservative on the Democratic spectrum than Bernie Sanders would be, in just trying to wipe debt out completely. But it does give Democrats an incentive to support them, I think, in the midterm election. I mean, when you're talking about how this was a campaign promise, as Nate pointed out, the White House struggled for more than a year over this issue of student debt cancellation. And during his campaign, he promised to forgive up to $10,000 for all federal student loan borrowers. And he's been under immense pressure from progressives to stick with that pledge. Well, guess what? I mean, he could argue, I have stuck with the pledge. If you make less than $125,000, you didn't receive a Pell Grant, $10,000 off your debt, right? If you received a Pell Grant, $20,000 off your debt. I think that's a smart move.
That's exactly right. I would add that when it comes to inflation, at least for the White House, their strategy itself is that the student loan repayments is set to resume in January of 2023. And so when we think about inflation itself, because the payments itself resume, consumer spending will essentially increase. And I believe that's scheduled just for the month of January to accumulate about $4 billion there. And so this is how they're hoping that it will offset inflation itself. But let's not forget, there are a lot of legal challenges that are being presented against this, and people are trying to understand, really, if President Joe Biden has this really the authority to be able to cancel student loans by $10,000 for the guidelines that we all just discussed. But first and foremost, I would just like to go ahead and give a round of applause to the Biden administration. Three things. One, as we think about the Biden-Harris administration, they've been very intentional around ensuring that everyone can essentially have access to education. And what we've seen is that HBCUs were able to pay off some student loans through money that was given from, and not just the Biden administration. This is coming from the CARES Act and everything. So let's just put that on the table. But ultimately, student loans were able to get paid off for some HBCU students. Secondly, there's a lot of conversation around, will this close the racial wealth gap? $10,000 being forgiven, or the proposal itself being enacted, will not substantially close the racial wealth gap. That's just one start, right, to closing the racial wealth gap. There's also another proposal about $50,000. That's more, that will have a bigger impact. It will have a bigger effect. But when we think about wealth itself, something like reparations, we're thinking about a real, true conversation. Something like reparations is one of the ways that we can really, truly, when you see that proposal fully develop and come out into the public sphere, be claimed to say that it's going to substantially close the racial wealth gap. But again, the student loan debt is just one tactic, and it'll have some marginal effects. The last thing here, I do think it's important to have some really interesting dialogue right now, particularly with people who are in the progressive circle, because I do understand that we want 50,000. Listen, I'm 100% forgive it all right now at this very moment, like the next second, right? But for where we stand right now, the fact that this proposal is here, I really think it's important to think about the Biden administration's commitment to working class families, to Black voters. The Black voters put the Biden administration in office at about 90%. And so sometimes we have to be able to square these things together. There's a step forward that's ultimately being happened here. And this is why it's important that we remain out there, remain out in the streets, remain out there and communicating to the community what is essentially important. Because sometimes what happens with stuff like this is there's a major legislative accomplishment and we sort of retreat to our houses. No, we want 50,000. Let's continue the conversation. We want full student loan debt forgiveness. Let's continue the conversation. Don't just, when election day is up, we're going back home, we're going to sleep, we're, doing what we do. And I get it, we have to pay our bills. I get it. But at the same time, this is what it means to be someone who is participating in our democracy and who is active and engaged. And so, of course, there's mixed opinions, rightfully so. This is America. But all in all, I do think that some credit should be given on this.
And, what's interesting is that these same people who are outraged for the student loan forgiveness had nothing to say when the Republicans passed that huge tax cut in 2017. Not anything to say. And by the way, that added $3 trillion to the deficit, right? All the deficit hawks were silent. Well, in addition to the fact that, what was the legitimate argument as to why this was equitable or fair? And I think Biden made that a point when a reporter challenged him on that. Do you think this is fair to those who had to pay their way? He responds, do you think it's fair for the top income or earning corporations to not pay their fair share in taxes? Is that fair? I think that was a perfect response to that question, because we often haven't heard any kind of challenge to the Republican hypocrisy as it pertains to changing the tax code to benefit top income earning corporations. But when it comes down to, easing the burden of students who are trying to make their way into, middle class life, all of a sudden, this is too much of an economic burden for us. Jordan?
I agree completely. With regard to the financial impact on the country, it is so hypocritical that the same people who are so anti-tax that they're fomenting threats against the IRS wants to make sure that the federal government gets this 10K of income from these people. It's hypocritical. It's foolishness. The reaction, in my opinion, from the Reds on Fox and everywhere else is just it's calculated weaponization of jealousy. And what about meism? This is kind of thing that PR firms recommend. Get them outraged, make them think, hey, why didn't I get this? Why isn't it for me? It's for them. It's spin. It's PR spin. They know it's a winning issue. They know that this man people will feel like he just gave them $10,000. Now we know that's not exactly what happened, but they'll feel that way and they'll feel good about him and they want to fight that tooth and nail. I saw an awesome thread on Twitter that was showing all of the public PPP loan information for the people who are complaining the loudest on Twitter. And it's like these humongous loans, like $60,000, $100,000. And they're complaining about these people getting this write-off. I mean, it's absurd. It's truly absurd.
And I'll add to that. The worst part about it is most of these people have paid their loans so long that they probably doubled the amount of money that they actually took out in the first place in just interest, because it's been over so many years. So the fact that people took out PPP loans and didn't pay a dime back, not even a dollar, not one dime back, and then they're sitting around complaining, makes it even more of a pity party that they're trying to make because they think that it's buying election votes. And Mitt Romney came on Twitter and said, this is basically bribery, because he thinks that is going to swing votes in the Democrats' favor by this happening. And you know what? To a point, there, it's not bribery, but they're right. I think people are going to look at this as, if you're looking at this as a person who's been watching politics, you have to say that Joe Biden has been keeping his promises. What didn't he do? What didn't he do that he said he was going to do, right? And I think the $10,000, while it's not earth-shattering, I'll say that. It's not earth-shattering to have $10,000. Now, $10,000 is a lot of money. I think we'll all take it if we can get it, right? But what it does is it's a sense of relief, right? Yep. And people associate relief, and it creates a brand of who's coming to help, who's coming to harm, who's making a lot of noise and being negative, who's coming calmly, passing things, doing what we need to do. We have all these comments against this is just helping out the middle class. Yeah, that's where the battleground for election is, right? So just making that comment alone should show you the amount of fear that's going on. That because usually if you win as a president, if you win the midterms, meaning if you keep control, that's something that's a huge bellwether of reelection, right? And they desperately need to get back into power, so they don't have the first president ever that's actually indicted and thrown into prison.
Yeah, and to Jordan's case, I just wanted to throw up some numbers. These are the Republican members that Jordan was alluding to whose PPP loans were forgiven. Matt Gaetz of Florida, $476,000. Marjorie Taylor Greene, $180,000. Greg Pence, Mike Pence's brother, over $79,000. It goes on and on. Carol Miller, $31 million. Yeah, I mean, you know, the hypocrisy over the outrage, I should say, over this $10,000 forgiveness is outrageous. You know, none of these people are concerned about the impact any of their forgiven loans have on the economy. But, you know, to the point that Arsene raised, he raised a really good point about the legality or the legal battles that are to come as a result of this. It made me think about the fact that conservatives are likely to take the White House to court in a lot of respects to argue that this exceeds the scope of executive authority. So I want to ask you, do you think that the conservatives are likely to prevail in the courts by arguing that the executive branch lacks the authority to provide such sweeping relief without congressional authority?
I mean, with this Supreme Court, who knows, to be completely honest. But two things. First off, the legal authority Biden is citing comes from the Higher Education Act, which authorizes the Department of Education to discharge loans. That's where public service loan forgiveness comes from. That's where income-based repayment comes from. That's the same authority that comes from. On both sides, for Democrats and Republican presidents, that's how people have gotten their loans forgiven in the past. But on the other, this, you know, that Biden was actively considering forgiving loans through executive action was first reported in, I think, April or May. And Republicans got so upset that they introduced legislation in committee to say that Biden can't do that. So that's kind of an ambition right there. I would hope a judge would look at that at least and say, you know what, maybe he can, but who knows, considering how, you know, captured the courts are.
Either way, it won't happen by November. So that's the problem, right? So, you know, after November, it won't be an issue. I promise you.
You know, it's rich that they're arguing, they would make an executive authority argument while we're in the middle of a whole debacle with Trump arguing that his executive authority exceeded the Espionage Act to take those documents, right, without the approval of the National Archives. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, guys. I mean, the backdrop in which a lot of these arguments are taking place on, to me, makes it so much richer, right? Because we're talking about Biden, or they're talking about Biden exceeding the scope of his authority, while they're arguing that the FBI had no right to search Mar-a-Lago for documents Trump had no right to have, right? And, you know, even whipping up fear and anger about the FBI to the point where a man takes up arms and a nail gun to go out to the FBI headquarters in Ohio. I mean, I just wanted to throw that in there because oftentimes we can get caught up on the next headline, the next story, and not put everything in one picture. But that's what we're dealing with here. And I think, you know, to the point of fiscal responsibility, these are the same people that want to waste people's tax dollars if they get the majority on stupid investigations into Dr. Fauci, right, and Hunter Biden, as opposed to actually focusing on ensuring that another terrorist attack doesn't, let's call it what it is, a terrorist attack doesn't occur on the Capitol building anymore. Anyone else?
I just think another level of the strategery of this particular action is he has to resume the loan payments. Like at some point, he just, given his political place on the spectrum, there was no, indefinite delay. And so given that, the 10,000 distracts from the fact that the other part of the announcement is y'all are about to start making these payments again in January. So that's pretty shrewd, because because if he had just came out with that second half, it would have been a very negative story. But instead, that part is not even part of the conversation. So I thought that was pretty shrewd.
That's an excellent point. And that goes to the point I was trying to make earlier, in that I think this is the perfect balance, right? It's a give and a take. And I think Biden has it really is evident of the way he's navigated himself through a lot of difficult decisions in this presidency, I think. Nate?
While I agree that the student loan interest pause is eventually going to end, I'm not sure that's actually going to be in January. This is right after Christmas, so people are still going to be paying down their Klarna and Pay in 4 payments for their kids' Christmas gifts. So to make people start paying loans again right on New Year's Day doesn't seem to me like the best political move. So I do agree with you, Jordan, that they're going to end eventually. I'm just not sure that January is actually going to be the final pause, like Biden says, because he's used that language before, and then extended loan forgiveness through 2021 and 2022. So I'm not exactly sure, but I do agree that it's going to end one day.
Yeah. This is the thing. For folks paying attention, like, you have to vote. You really have to vote. I heard a lot of people complain about how they don't want to hear anything else this administration has to do if they don't touch student loans. Well, guess what? The administration has made a move on student loan debt forgiveness, right? So now the ball is back in your court. You have to vote. You have to participate in this election. Midterm elections historically are terrible for Democrats. And low voter turnout all around, especially among younger voters and voters of color. That's why this is so crucial that we don't take this thing for granted. You want to see that you're arguing that you're not seeing enough progressive policies enacted fast enough. Well, guess what? The solution to that is getting up and voting. Anyone else?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think voting is going to be impacted regardless of what goes on. I think in related to student loans also, I think we don't know. We're still in COVID. We keep acting like COVID is over, and that there's no financial impact. There's no impact on voting. It could be another spike of another variant, and that could be around election day, and then we throw things off. Or maybe we saw the worst of it, and in January they feel the economy is strong enough to resume payments. We don't know. I think what we do know is that $10,000 is at least an earnest amount that says care, right? It's not small enough for people to just walk over and say he did nothing, right? I think another thing that people, if you've been paying your loan for more than 10 years and it's under 12,000, that's forgiven also. There's a lot of little other caveats that get you to some sort of loan forgiveness. So I think we should just take a look. I encourage everyone to vote. Black Caucus season is coming around. I'll be around DC for that. Get involved in everything that's going on, and vote for your future, not what's going on right now.
And if I could springboard off of that, I do 100% understand the sort of fatigue when it comes to this dialogue around voting. From where I'm from, it's just, a mix of opinions on this front. And when we think about someone like the Biden-Harris administration and all of the people who have been hired into the administration and all of the people who are committed to the issues, who are committed to the conversations, who are committed to enacting change, we can't view this in isolation, meaning that, those folks just got in there and, they get some things done, but it's just like, it's not enough. So we just kind of wipe our hands with it. No, they're actually doing work. They're actively ensuring that, again, they can enact the policies. For example, we talk about the student loan. We see the series of votes that have been taken on George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in the prior Congress, but also this Congress. We think about voting, the ability to get access to voting. There are a lot of things that are happening. There are a lot of things that are going on that, truthfully, the information may not reach you, right, to understand what's happening, what's going on. But again, these things are happening. These things are, again, passing in the House. Unfortunately, they're not passing in the Senate. You have the filibuster. You have a series of impediments. And so I don't know personally if that's enough to say that I'm not going to vote, right? But I can understand why someone may be influenced or swayed or motivated by that, right? We think about all the information that flows on Twitter, Facebook, right? Mis and disinformation from, the right, from a variety of sources that are essentially sowing discord and sowing mistrust. And so I do really, truly go back to my original point, which is, or my central message here, rather. It's really important to have those personnel and those surrogates and people who are out there helping people understand the importance of, making sure that you're out there to vote, but ensuring that this is sustainable. Because unfortunately, but truthfully, what can happen, and what the media is saying, what may happen is we may move into not a Democratic president anymore, but a Republican president. And so when we think about understanding this over not only a 4-year trajectory, but an 8-year trajectory or a 12-year trajectory or 16-year, we're not going to be able to see that. We're not going to be able to truly understand, okay, is Black wealth actively increasing? We actively need to see these policies changing for a period of time, if that makes sense. It won't truthfully happen in 2 years. And I get it. People are saying, no, I want to see it tomorrow. I want to see it in 2 months. I want to see it in 2 years. I hate to say it, but that's just not how it works. And so I'm happy to offer myself as a resource. And I hope that everyone will definitely vote this fall.
Especially, thank you, Arsene, and especially when you have an active, intentional opposition that's dedicated to playing the long game, right? If it means erasing or eroding away at the progress you made over a series of congressional election cycles, so be it. They're willing to wait that long to undo or to erode or nitpick away at the progress that was made. Mr. Gwangpa?
Yeah, before we go, because I know you're going to shut it down, I just want to give an acknowledgement, a little off script, to Wes Moore down in Maryland, who's poised to become the first Black man or Black person elected to statewide election. And I think that's a moment in itself that needs to be acknowledged, not just because he's my guy, but just because I think that's something that's major. And I would love to see, Maryland and the people of Maryland really savor this as progress, as something that, for years it's been attempted, but now as a man who of such high character and integrity is poised to win such a big seat. I just want to acknowledge Wes and his campaign.
Awesome. Arsene Frederick, Nathan Honore, Egg Nwangpa, and Jordan Stredwick. This conversation was outstanding, I think. I say positive things every week, but this conversation, I think, was very, very thorough. I thought it was very intriguing and robust. And I'm grateful to each of you for taking the time out to be a part of episode 70. It's hard to imagine 70 episodes, 70 of the Political Mic. Thank you guys so much. Again, the Political Mic is now accessible on Spotify, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Subscribe, follow, give me a review. Follow on YouTube, subscribe, and also follow on Instagram. And we've also got a Telegram channel, so you can continue the conversation there. Sign up for it, download the app, join the channel. It's a lot of fun. We thank you each for the time that you spent on the program tonight. With that being said, as I encourage you all to do, vote. This is a crucial midterm election season, as we talked about. And also refrain from sketchy sources of information. Challenge the sources of information you do get your news from. With that being said, thank you for tuning in. And I'm concluding episode 70 of the Political Mic. Thank you, guys.